Thank you all for joining. This is my 13th virtual town hall meeting. So I guess it's fitting that if we're going to have problems, it would happen on the 13th virtual town hall. And again, if you have a question, if you go to the bottom of your screen, type it into the question and answer portion, and then we'll be able to read those questions and get you an answer. If for some reason we don't get time to answer all the questions, if you email your question to me at thompson.townhall@mail.house.gov, thompson.townhall@mail.house.gov. We'll get an answer for you. Thank you all very, very much for participating. And I know these are real tough times for everybody. It's real hard on our families. It's real difficult, not everybody not being able to go to work, and a lot of questions still about what's going to happen when school starts, how we're going to do that. I know the financial impact of COVID has been devastating for my 5 counties that I represent, and I'm sure it's the same every place across the country. About 3 months ago now, the House passed legislation, the latest in the COVID legislation, to deal with this. And remember, there's 2 parts to this. There's the healthcare side of COVID, and then there's the economic side of COVID. And in order to fully recover on the economic side, we really have to get a handle on the healthcare side. And the bill that we passed focuses on both sides. It provides money for healthcare providers, for testing and for tracing. And it also provides financial help on the economic side, specifically to state and local governments who have literally been on the tip of the spear in their response to COVID. And they're running out of money. And if we don't get funding to them, they have no choice but to start laying people off. And if that happens, it's going to exacerbate the economic side of this problem. More people will be laid off. There'll be more in unemployment costs. There'll be less money spent in the community. It'll be a terrible impact on our businesses, our small businesses, and our communities. And then in addition to that, the people that will be laid off are the people that we rely on for services. Healthcare providers, school teachers, law enforcement, firefighters, the street crews, all the people that supply the services that we depend on. So it's critical that we get this legislation passed. And I know there's been a tremendous outpour from constituents in my district regarding the mail situation. And there's critical funding in this bill for our postal service to make sure they have the funds necessary to operate, especially going into the election cycle. So there's a lot going on. Just know that I certainly understand your frustration. I'm pretty frustrated myself at times, and I'm working as hard as I can to bring about resolve. And I'm looking forward to your questions tonight. We have a very special guest tonight that I think you'll enjoy, Representative Jamie Raskin, who represents Maryland's 8th Congressional District. He serves on the Judiciary Committee, the Oversight and Reform Committee, and the Administration and Rules Committee. And the reason that I invited him on tonight, not only is he a friend and a great member of Congress, he serves on a brand new select committee, the House Select Committee on Coronavirus Crisis. And this is a subcommittee that was formed to oversee the federal funds spent to respond to this crisis and to ensure that the federal government is implementing the new laws appropriately in a way that help small businesses and individuals. Now, before he came to Congress, Congressman Raskin was a state senator, and I'm told that the best members of Congress were always state senators before. And he was also a professor of constitutional law at American University's Law School. And I'll tell you, he's our go-to guy in regard to a constitutional expert, not only for me, but for all of my colleagues in Congress. He's lights out brilliant on constitutional law issues. And Jamie, I wish you were here in person tonight. Wish we were doing this in person. But thank you for joining me. The next best thing is to see you virtually. So,
Mike, you're very kind. And I can't tell you how honored I am to be with you and to be with your great constituents in California's 5th Congressional District. And it's curious that it's your 13th week of doing this. And it was an unlucky 13 for you in terms of Facebook, but lucky for me because I was born on Friday the 13th, and 13th's my lucky number. So I think it all fits that I'm with you tonight, Mike. But I'm delighted to come on to talk about the Coronavirus Select Committee and anything else on the minds of your constituents. Let me just say before we start, how thrilled I am to get to serve with you, and your leadership on the gun violence issue has been so extraordinary, and just looking up to you and learning from you on a range of issues, on healthcare, on the environment, on everything that you've been out in front on. It's just been remarkable. So, California is obviously, in the forefront of so much of what we do in the House, but you are very much in the forefront of California. And so congratulations on getting the number 2 person on the ticket this week in Kamala Harris. That's cool. I can't remember the last time we've had someone from California on the ticket on our side. But your leadership is really exemplary, so I'm delighted to be with you.
well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I know we've got a lot of people who probably want to ask questions. I thought what we do is just to get it started, I've got a couple of questions of my own I thought I would ask you, and you could comment on them, and then we'll ease into what our viewers have to say. I'm kind of interested in your insight as to what it's like to serve on the subcommittee and what sort of things you're doing. I know we heard yesterday on our all-member conference call from Congressman Clyburn, who's the chair, that you guys have already been successful in getting $118 million in PPP money returned to the Treasury, the money that went out to people who probably shouldn't have gotten that money. So can you tell us a little bit about them?
Well, yes. I mean, as you know, we did our best in crafting the PPP program to build criteria in it so that it would go to the neediest businesses, not the greediest businesses. But the executive branch has not exactly been punctilious about trying to enforce this. And so I think the first one we got back was $10 million from a company which really had the most dubious qualifications under the eligibility criteria. And all we had to do was write a letter, and they returned it. And then you may remember a number of businesses started returning it at that point, which is not a bad resolution. It's not about taking people to court and holding up to public shame, but the money's got to go for the businesses that really need it, not, hedge funds and stuff like that. There was a nursing home that returned $109 million to us and had received the money under very dubious circumstances. And of course, we just found out this week about a $765 million loan that went to Kodak, the Kodak company, that was nearing extinction, but suddenly got this huge $750 million loan for pharmaceutical development when it had no experience at all in the field, but it had some connections. And so when we shined a spotlight on that, wrote a letter about it, that money was held up and has been paused so we can answer the questions about that. And so the problem, Mike, is that there's two different visions of what government is in the land, okay? And one vision, I know it's the one that you hold, is that government's an instrument of the common good. It's an instrument of the public interest. It's got to serve the people. And those of us who go in as representatives are nothing but the servants of the people. We're there to try to vindicate the fiduciary interests of our principles, that is, the people who sent us there. We're just the agents for the people. Now, there's another vision out there, which is that no, government is a money-making opportunity for the people who go into government. You know, and America's a great country. You can go out and make money in a lot of different ways, but you should not think about going into government as a way to make money. But we're seeing a lot of that. And we sent a letter just this week to the Secretary of HHS, Alex Azar, and to the guy who's the chief advisor for Operation Warp Speed, which is the administration's, you know, project on the vaccine and getting stuff done. His name is Monsef Slaoui. And suddenly it has come out that he has all these conflicts of interest. He's got millions of dollars of investments in companies that were getting grants and loans for vaccine development. In fact, he called some of these healthcare investments that he has, millions of dollars worth, his retirement plan. So there was $10 million he had in GlaxoSmithKline, which got $2.1 billion with another company for experimental vaccines. And, you know, he had a $10 million investment in it. Another one he held was in Moderna, another substantial investment that he's agreed to divest. But how could anybody think that that makes sense for the guy who's in charge, basically distributing this money, to be invested in the companies that are getting it? And then what it does is it casts a cloud over the whole process. We don't know whether or not the money's going to the companies who are best qualified to get us a vaccine, or whether it's just going to people who have the inside contacts.
Oh, thank you. You know, I've heard from so many and I've read so much, all the major economists credit Congress with working so quickly to respond to the economic side of COVID with the PPP and the EIDL program. And they'll tell you that that quick response has really saved us from going into a depression. But whenever you work that quickly, there's always going to be glitches. And, you know, that's why, in part, that's why you guys are there, to make sure that those glitches get discovered and fixed. We're writing this next bill now. We're supposed to be negotiating it. I don't know if the White House is ready to come back to the negotiating table or not. But are there certain things that we should be particularly careful of in drafting these bills?
Well, yeah, we want to try to build in as many checks and balances as possible so that there's oversight by the inspectors general, there's oversight by Congress, and we've tried to build that in with our select committee. And then we also have a pandemic response bicameral committee that's been set up. It's still waiting, unfortunately, for a chair to be agreed upon. But it's important to have those checks. As you know, Mike, because you were very involved in it, when we passed the HEROES Act 3 months ago, we were looking, just as you suggested in your opening remarks, at two sides of this. And the first part is the public health side of it. We're in a plague, we're in a pandemic. Most of the world, the European countries and the Asian countries, have COVID-19 on the run. They have it down to a manageable level where the end is in sight. Unfortunately, we've moved in the other direction because we still don't have a nationwide plan. You know, a plan is a strategy for victory, for defeating COVID-19, and we don't have anything like that. You know, we've lost more than 160,000 people now. We're losing more than 1,000 people a day to the disease. There are 50,000 new cases every day. And there are parts of the country where the pandemic is raging out of control. So part of it is to invest in massive testing, aggressive testing, and then militant contact tracing to follow up on people once we find them. So we get the disease on the run. And that's got to be combined with all the other public health precautions we know and understand. The only things that work, the masking, the social distancing, the staying at home, except when it's necessary to leave the home. Then the other side of it is to get the economy through the nightmare that's been caused by the disease. and that's the unemployment benefits. We fought in the House for $600 a week that we're trying to continue. That's one of the things there's a tug of war about between the House and the Senate right now. But also the PPP money for the small business aid, but also the money for hospitals, for first responders, to supplement the aid of people who are first responders, the firefighters and the cops and the nurses and people at the cash registers and the grocery store clerks, the bus drivers, the maintenance workers, and so on. These are the people who've been getting us through this crisis. So our bill ended up with a price tag of $3 trillion to get us through to the end of the year. The Senate came back with $1 trillion. I understand that Speaker Pelosi has been saying, we will get ours down to $2 trillion if the Senate can come up to $2 trillion. Let's meet in the middle and figure out how to meet the needs of the people as we fight the disease. And that's kind of where we are now. And unfortunately, I think the Senate adjourned today. They went home. And of course, you and I are on call. It's easy for me because I live in Maryland, but we're on call for 24 hours notice to go back. We refused to adjourn because we said, we're just waiting for a word from the Senate and we can go back and be with our constituents until then.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I would phrase one thing a little differently, and that is the idea that the Senate came back with an offer. I think it's important to note that the Senate has never been at the table. The Senate Democrats and the House Democrats have been meeting with the White House personnel, Secretary of the Treasury Mnuchin, and the president's new chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who you and I both serve with in the House. And Mark Meadows was a right-wing bomb thrower. He was not a negotiator. As a matter of fact, when John Boehner, the Republican speaker, tried to work across the aisle to get a budget passed, Mark Meadows worked to get Boehner thrown out of the speakership. So
he wanted to blow up the deal.
Exactly. So whoever thought he was a negotiator, I haven't yet figured that out. But the Senate really has been absent, and you know, and it may just be a technicality, but I think it's important to point out they did not pass a bill. 3 months ago, the House passed a bill. Here is our plan. This is what we believe that we need to get America through this problem. And Mitch McConnell said, we're going to take a pause. Well, the downturn in the economy didn't take a pause. Coronavirus didn't take a pause, but the Senate took a pause. And they never passed a bill. As a matter of fact, McConnell put out his bill, the one that you're referring to, that was $1 trillion. But when he put it out, he didn't put it up for a vote because he said that at least 20 members of his Republican Senate would vote against it. So they didn't even have the votes to pass their bill. So they've been AWOL in these discussions, and that's got to change.
Well, it's a really important point and way of thinking about what's happened. They haven't put anything on the table. I mean, it's talk. It's all talk.
Let's go to our questions from our viewers. Katie, you want to read us some of the questions that people are asking?
Yeah, definitely. All right, so first question, it's got a lot of likes, so there's a lot of interest. It says, what are we doing to assure that the U.S. Post Office will be able to process all of the mail-in ballots this election?
Well, I'll start with that, and then Jamie, you can add on. We have $25 billion in the HEROES Act that provides them with the funds necessary in order to carry out their duty. And part of their duty is making sure that the ballots get to where they're supposed to go. You know, there's been a lot of discussion about this, and we've heard the president go from voting by mail is absolutely corrupt to urging voters who vote for him to vote by mail. We had his daughter and his son involved in a California special election where they cut commercials urging people in Orange County to vote for the Republican candidate by mail. And we all know most people on this Zoom have probably cast a vote by mail sometime in their history. I voted by mail when I was in the Army, when I was stationed away from my home in California. And it hasn't been controversial until now. And then today, the president came out and, you know, I'm not a lawyer, Jamie. I don't know what you thought about it, but it made my hair stand on end when he said that in order for the post office to be able to do its job and deliver the ballots, they need funding, and I'm not going to give them funding in this bill. And it sounded an awful lot like voter suppression to me. But we've got money in there. We're hammering it every day. We're trying to bring it to the attention of the voters. I know that even the president's supporters, Senate Republicans who are up for re-election, aren't pleased with what he's doing. They need the ability to have a fair and transparent vote by mail system in their states. So we're just going to keep pushing, and we need all of our voters, all of our constituents to push as well.
Yeah, well, that's pretty comprehensive. Let me just add a few things to what Congressman Thompson has said, and thank you for raising this most central and pressing question. You know, I don't know whether or not the Republicans decide they want to make a deal with us on everything that's in the HEROES Act. We believe it's overwhelmingly important. We think it's urgent. But I do know that one of the reasons they're pulling out is precisely because of the $25 billion we've got in there for the post office and the remaining $3.6 billion that we've got in there for the Election Assistance Commission to distribute to the states to fortify their ability to implement vote by mail and other measures like early voting and securing the ballots and the polling places. So we will have to continue to fight for the HEROES Act. I do think that there are mayors and governors around the country, both Democrats and Republicans and independents, who understand the absolute urgency of getting money at every level of government. And so I'm hoping that the president and the White House feel that heat. But beyond that, we have got to use, as soon as we get back to Washington, Mike, we got to use our hearing powers, our investigatory and oversight powers, to have hearings into the post office and exactly what's going on. Because some of the reports, which seem very credible, are absolutely startling. You know, the new guy that the president put in, LaJoy, has been undercutting overtime. That sounds like, oh, well, maybe, you know, that's just some kind of workplace personnel issue. No, because they've also not been hiring people, so they're understaffed. Then they send letter carriers out there, and maybe they need to go to 5:30 or 5:45 or 6:15 to get all the mail. But if they say no overtime at 5 o'clock, they got to come back. You know, they're not even allowed to work for free, right? And they shouldn't be forced to work for free anyway, but they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to be doing any overtime. So it's an attempt to reduce the workforce, squeeze the workforce, and then make it harder and harder to deliver the mails. And we're starting to get reports from all over the country. I've certainly gotten some from constituents about mail being extremely late and being dropped off in weird ways. And so we need to be doing oversight hearings about that. And we need to be figuring out exactly every possible way that there could be political interference with proper delivery of ballots, proper to people's homes, and then proper delivery of the ballots from people's homes to the mailboxes and to the post offices. I mean, this is absolutely essential. And at the state level, we should be working to make sure that all ballots are received if they're postmarked by the day of election, not received by the day of election, which is just an invitation to political strategic mischief by the Trump administration. But I too was appalled by what the president said today. He's nothing if not transparent. He basically is saying, we are going to do everything that we can to thwart and to sabotage a fair election through the post office, which of course he's enjoyed voting by mail in New York, voting by mail in Florida. And as you've said, his political party has urged people to vote by mail. So this is just as much sabotage of the election as we saw the sabotage of the Affordable Care Act or other things that they disagree with, where they basically say, we're going to use our power over government to frustrate the functions of government.
That's well said. I just want to add, the post office is a big bureaucracy. And whenever the bigger the bureaucracy, I don't care if it's the private sector or the public sector, there's going to be things that go wrong. And over my time in public service, I've had complaints about the post office, but I've never had as many complaints as I'm having now. And I'm hearing from people throughout my district because of these new rules that this political appointee, contributor to the president, has been putting in place, and it's creating problems. So as voters, the other thing we need to do is make sure we vote early, get your ballot, get it put in. If there's drop boxes, drop it off. If you're able to do that, do anything you can that will help minimize any problems that they may throw our way.
Yeah. And if you permit me one more point about this, Mike, there's a great book called How the Post Office Built America. And it's really about how it's a central American institution that's under attack here. The author's name is Winifred Gallagher. Our first Postmaster General was Benjamin Franklin, whose biography is called The First American. And he thought that the post office, and the founders thought the post office and the postal roads would become the transportation network for the country, the communications network for the country. That's why so many of the newspapers have a name like the Washington Post or, the Buffalo Courier Express, or, they're related to the post office and delivery of the postal mails. The post office also has kept going through rain and sleet and snow and ice and political corruption and interference through all of the wars and the Depression. And it was also a central avenue of economic opportunity and upward mobility for people who were excluded from other parts of the economy, for African Americans, for women, and so on. So the right-wing attack on the post office, as you know, you've been in Congress longer than me, has been going on for a while, but it's just hitting a real reddish blue heat right now. They're doing everything they can to destroy the post office, and we've got to do everything we can to defend it. I mean, the veterans get their medicines through the mails. The Social Security recipients get their checks through the mails. The election takes place through the mails. How can the President of the United States be waging war on this central American institution?
And don't forget the over 100,000 veterans who were employed by the U.S. Postal Service. Katie, and you have any other questions?
Got lots. All right, next question.
We'll try not to talk so long.
No, this has been great. The next person says, I am extremely concerned that no advancement has occurred in the negotiations. Last week, you spoke about what the new assistance should include, but you didn't speak of what actually we can hope for. Aid for the USPS and cities and states is essential.
Well, I agree, and I spoke to that briefly already. I have a pile of letters on my desk here in my Napa office tonight from all the counties in our district and all the cities in our district explaining the situation that they're in. They are all strapped. And as I said earlier, if in fact we don't provide some financial relief for the cities and the counties and the states, we're going to see massive layoffs. Because unlike the federal government, the states and the local governments, they can't run a deficit. They can't be in debt. They've got to have a balanced budget. And if they can't balance their budget, what they have to do is make cuts. And the only way that a state or local government can make a cut is to lay somebody off or truncate your services. And that's going to be devastating. I've heard from chambers of commerce throughout the 5th Congressional District who were worried. Matter of fact, some of them are already seeing it. because some local governments and the state have been making some layoffs. And when that happens, people have fewer dollars to spend in their communities. And that means that the economic engine in the hometown isn't working. And as I said before, so not only do you see higher costs and unemployment, less dollars being spent in our hometowns, but you see less services. Teachers get laid off, firefighters get laid off, cops get laid off, healthcare providers get laid off. And that's the last thing that we need right now. It's the last thing we need anytime, but certainly right now.
All right. Next question. This person says, I concur that the Senate is not acting on the HEROES Act bill. What are you doing to get some action here?
Well, as I said, I have this stack of letters from my counties and my cities. Those are going to be sent back and put into the record. I'm doing everything I can to be very vocal about it, as is every member of our Democratic caucus in Washington. It's a daily issue on the news. The good news is, from a leverage perspective, it's starting to spill out across party lines. If you follow the elections, you'll note that in the last week, a large number of Democratic congressional seats that were once considered toss-up seats, meaning they could go Democrat or they could go Republican, are moving towards the Democratic side. So seats that were toss-up are now lean or solid Democrat. There's been a number of Republican seats that were lean Republican a week ago that are now toss-up seats. And you're seeing the same thing in the Senate. So my sense is that Mitch McConnell is going to start hearing from his vulnerable Republican members of the Senate saying, hey, we need to provide some help for folks in our district, for small businesses, for healthcare providers, for state and local governments, or I'm going to lose my election and we're not going to control the Senate. And I'm hopeful that that'll work as leverage to get McConnell to move. But again, I think when, as Jamie said, when the Senate adjourns and goes home, when they don't even come to the negotiating table, and you have Mark Meadows, a known bomb thrower, not a negotiator, doing the bidding for these guys, it's a catastrophe, and it's got to change.
Just to echo one point there, we're counting on whatever moderate Republicans are left. The governor of Maryland, for example, Larry Hogan, is someone I've praised for his performance in the pandemic. You know,
a Republican.
He's a Republican, and he's actually the head of the National Governors Association. And I, you know, credit where credit's due. I think at the very beginning he did a terrific job, and he's been working hard, and he's following the science and the data. And of course, Maryland is home to the NIH and to the FDA and NOAA, and so, you know, we believe in science there. You know, we're not guided by magical thinking and you know, phony quack miracle cures and stuff like that. So he's been a good voice, and we've been trying to work with him to empower Republicans like that around the country to go to the Senate, to go to the president and say, we've got to act. This is a desperate situation. This thing is so far beyond partisan politics that it really goes to the question of our commitment to the role of the federal government. I mean, what is the federal government for? It's for doing those things that the states cannot do on their own. Like Mike was saying, we need the federal government to fill in during a time of major budget crisis for the state and local governments, because they're overwhelmed by need, but their revenues have plummeted because the businesses have not been able to operate. That's what the federal government is for. And it's like the public health crisis itself. We, you know, under the administration, pitted the states against each other in this ridiculous and bitter competition for the PPEs, for the ventilators, for the equipment, instead of the federal government organizing it and regulating it. And Now we have this catch-as-catch-can, ludicrous patchwork of openings and closings and reopenings, and nothing makes any sense. Instead of what I had proposed with Donna Shalala, who was, of course, the Secretary of HHS under the Clinton administration, but we had proposed a plan where all of the states would submit reopening plans to HHS, to a national scientific advisory panel, which would make comments and suggestions and then approve the reopening as part of a staged national plan, and the feds would pay for it. We would pay for it. We would make the investment to make sure it's done right. But instead, it's been helter-skelter chaos. And so what do we get? America's an absolute outlier. We are now a COVID-19 pariah state. There are, I think, 55 or 60 countries in the world where none of us can go now. We can't go to Canada. These countries aren't going to admit us. So we right now are viewed as the hotspot of the world. And I'm not sure people understand what an outlier we've become because of the dereliction of duty at the highest levels of government.
That's well said. Thank you.
All right, next question. This person says, our business is seriously affected by this economic situation. We are in the restaurant supply chain. Where is the Independent Restaurant Act and another round of PPP? We are standing on the moon and our air is running out.
That's an excellent point. Restaurants have suffered terribly during this pandemic. And a lot of folks forget that there is a supply chain that goes along with that. So I don't know what the collar does, but you have people that supply fruits, vegetables, meat, chicken, eggs, silverware, tablecloths, wine, milk, everything else. So it branches out across the economy when something like that happens. There's been a couple of efforts to help bring restaurants back. I know I have a couple. I have tax legislation that is in the bill that would benefit restaurants. There is a standalone restaurant bill, and Earl Blumenauer is the author of that. I'm a co-author of that, that would provide assistance to restaurants. I have also a bill of mine, the FEED Act, is part of the HEROES Act. And what that would do is that would allow restaurants to work with small producers, small farmers, to provide healthy, nutritious meals to people who are food insecure. And the costs would be paid 100% by FEMA. And the restaurant community is supporting that 100%. Agriculture is supporting it 100%. And it's a way by which restaurants can stay open. They can keep their employees employed, and we can provide nutritious meals to people who otherwise would be going hungry. So there's a number of pieces of legislation out there that would help. Many of them are already in this HEROES Act, and the other ones will be taken up in September after we pass the HEROES Act and it's signed into law. There are also other specific communities of interest, different industries that are impacted differently in COVID. And there's a lot of legislation focused on dealing with them. And after we get through the HEROES Act, we'll be able to spend the time focusing on those and be able to address legislation that will help them.
And, I want to praise Congressman Thompson on the FEED Act and his work on that. I think, Mike, you were the first person to alert me to that. It's a brilliant idea. We've got tens of millions of food insecure people now. We have people going hungry. We've got millions of kids going hungry. And yet we've got this amazing restaurant sector that's out there that's just sitting idle. And we should mobilize it and we should subsidize it to go to work to meet the food need that's out there. And I mean, when I think about the obvious logic of doing that and how difficult it's been to move anything, I'm really afraid, Mike, that we're becoming a failed state, like a very rich state for some people, but a failed state. A failed state is one that cannot meet the basic needs of its people. You know, a basic need to be protected against disease. That's just basic. It shouldn't be politicized. It shouldn't be hung up on partisan games. You know, the state should just do that. And it's the same thing with food. If people are hungry, let's figure out how to mobilize the apparatus we've got. We got the greatest farmers in the world and the greatest restaurants in the world. Let's put it to work. But we act like this helpless giant, you know? And so for me, so much of this is just restoring our muscle as a national government that really works to meet the needs of our people.
Let me just say, make one more comment. The FEED Act, remarkably, is not just my bill, but it's bipartisan and bicameral. It has Republican co-authors in the House and Democratic and Republican co-authors in the Senate. And so this is a very, very popular measure. And, you know, Jamie, you talked about food insecurity. I think that there's something in the HEROES Act, in the bill that we passed and the bill that McConnell wrote but didn't take up for vote, that is a real illustrative juxtaposition of where we are in regard to what you just said about becoming a failed state. We recognize in the HEROES Act the importance of addressing food insecurity. The millions of people, seniors, folks who are unemployed, children who don't have adequate food resources. And we budgeted in our bill $60 billion to address that. That's in the HEROES Act. The bill that Mitch McConnell wrote, they address it also. $250,000. $250,000 to feed all the people who are food insecure in the United States of America. I think that paints a pretty clear picture of why we are as far apart as we are.
All right, next question. This person says, why doesn't the House demand that the Postmaster General appear before them immediately to explain his purposeful slowing down of mail delivery?
It's coming in the Oversight Committee. It will be coming soon, as soon as we go back to Washington. Remember, you know, we're trying to fend off this merciless assault on the electoral apparatus at the same time that we're dealing with COVID-19 and all, you know, the whole social and economic crisis that flows out of it. So, but I appreciate these questions very much about the election, Mike. Your constituents are right on here. I mean, you know, a lot of people are saying, I've heard members of Congress say, look, either they come to the table or they don't, but we've got to keep our eyes on the prize, which is the election. We can't all be bedazzled and distracted by the games that they're playing with us legislatively. We've got to make sure not only that we get the vote out, that everybody has the right to vote, but that all the votes are counted and that they translate into the proper electoral college allotment and so on. I mean, we've got a very creaky and in some ways obsolescent electoral system. And so we've got to watch every conceivable aspect of it.
And I know that Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer met with the Postmaster General just this, I believe, this last week, because they thought that they thought that they could figure out some way to compromise and negotiate that $25 billion that's in the HEROES Act. He thought that they had some ways that they could pare it down to $10 billion. And I know I heard the report when they got done, and they said they'd never met with anybody in charge of any entity within the federal government who knew less about that entity than this guy. And so I think the caller's correct. He needs to be questioned, but he's not there because he's a postal expert. He's, as I understand it, one of the only postmaster generals in modern times who's come to the job without any postal experience, and that's sad. And I know.
Yeah, and just one point on that. look at some of the people who've been our postmasters general, right? Ben Franklin, Abraham Lincoln was in the post office. Walt Whitman was in the post office. Harry Truman was in the post office. I mean, we've had great people come out of the post office. We have great people there, but not these political flunkies who are sent in to sabotage the operation.
And you forgot to mention that during graduate school, I worked in the post office.
Mike Thompson, I didn't even know. What was your job there, Mike?
I was a zip code sorter. I did a split shift. I would go in the morning at 5 in the morning, unload the bags of mail, take them out and zip code sort them. Then I'd come back at night and do the same thing. I did it. It was a graduate school job.
You learned your district from the ground up.
All right, so this will probably be our last question. This person says, how likely is it realistically that a compromise will be achieved? What is giving you hope?
I think that a compromise will be achieved. And as I mentioned earlier, it's based on the fact that this is not hurting just Democrats in blue states. This is hurting Americans across the United States of America. And I believe that my Republican colleagues, our Republican colleagues in the House and the Senate are going to be feeling this. And with 81 days before the election, I think they're going to start squawking. And I think that you're going to see some movement. And I'd rather see it sooner rather than later. Jamie, what are your predictions?
Well, I agree with that. I think that the moderate Republicans that are left will begin to turn up the heat. I think the people will begin to turn up the heat in the red states, which are just suffering terribly under COVID-19. So I think it's got to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it's a true sign of political desperation on the side of the Republicans, because basically what they're saying at that point is, well, their fortunes in November are completely hopeless, and their only shot is to try to sabotage the post office. And they would rather do that than to get help to the American people. I mean, it's hard to imagine a more basic betrayal of the duty of office and the oath of office than that.
You know, Jamie, early in my political career, I got called over to the White House by then President Clinton. He had wanted me to do something. And I used that opportunity with him in the Oval Office to alert him of a postal problem I was having in my district. I had a 10-year fight starting when I was in the state Senate to get a zip code for a particular city in my home county of Napa. It shared a zip code with a town on the other side of the county line in Solano County. And it created all kinds of problems, from misdelivered packages to I'd call with a constituent concern. They'd say, no, that's in Solano's zip code, go to San Francisco. San Francisco say, I don't care whose zip code it's in Napa, go to Sacramento. It was just a problem. So I finally got an audience with the president, and I told him I needed the zip code. And he said, well, I don't do zip codes. I said, all I want is an opportunity to explain the situation to the Postmaster General. And if you could just put in that call. I said, I've been calling for years and he won't return my call. And the guy who was the legislative representative for the White House told me later that President Clinton called him in and he said, who the hell is the Postmaster General? And it's a real juxtaposition. Here you had a president who had a Postmaster General who had postal experience. It was hands off, run the post office. It's not going to be a political deal. To today, where you have somebody who contributed millions of dollars to this president running a political sideshow in our U.S. service. So,
I mean, everything is corrupted. The president's been running it as a money-making operation from day one with the collection of money from foreign governments. I heard they wanted to give their own zip code to the Trump Hotel in Washington, which I call the Washington emolument. It's where all the foreign money comes in. Should be a stop on the tour buses. But I mean, obviously, Trump could give a zip code to his own ego at this point. It's a frightening situation, and we're just looking for more people to come and to speak up for the most common sense agenda for the next 3 months. That's it.
Well, Jamie, thank you very much for being on. I know it's late in Maryland. I appreciate you staying up. The last two of these I did from my office in Washington, and it started at 10 o'clock out there, so it's past time, I know. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in person back on the House floor so we can get this bill passed.
It's been a great pleasure, and when we get through this nightmare, I'm going to come out there and meet all of your fine constituents.
I love it. You're welcome to come out anytime. And to everybody who joined us tonight, thank you very much. Again, if your question wasn't answered, if you email me at thompson.townhall@mail.house.gov, I'll answer your question. Thank you all very, very much. Be safe. Make sure that you social distance, wash your hands, wear your mask. Thank you.